Today on Absolute Anthem, we're continuing our deep dive into the many abilities that the Javelins will be able to rock at launch by taking a look at the Javelin that you also passionately refer to as the Thick One. The thick boy, the thick gal, the thick old lady, however you want to name your inanimate, mobility-focused objects. Feel free to do so down in the comments section below throughout the course of this video. Now, the Colossus can of course equip two primary firearms like the other Javelins. However, it cannot use the two smallest weapon archetypes in the game, pistols and SMGs, but in turn it is the only Javelin strong enough to wield any of the heavy weapons, including the grenade launcher and the heavy machine gun. The Colossus also, of course, has its own innate melee ability that comes in the form of Heavy Smash, which allows it to just use its chassis and its giant hand to do a hammering attack. It will clear out small enemies instantly and even have a chance to knock down other foes, leaving them open to additional attacks from you or your teammates. Now, when it comes to our three ability trees or gear trees for the Colossus, we've got two that are tied directly to equipment pieces that will be on the Colossus itself, starting with the Ordnance Launcher, which is its shoulder-mounted weapon, and the Heavy Assault Launcher, which is its wrist-mounted weapons. The third tree is still the Colossus Javelin support gear selection. So let's start with that Ordnance Launcher, which kicks things off with High Explosive Mortar, which launches an explosive projectile that deals heavy area of effect damage. This is your more traditional mortar shell as you would expect from a mortar-style weapon. We also have the Burst Mortar, which fires a volley of smaller mortars that spread out to pummel a wider area of effect. We've seen this in action numerous times. We've got the Firewall Mortar, which fires a specialized mortar round that ignites a wall of flame, heavily damaging enemies that try to move through it. Great piece of crowd control, area denial going on here. Moving away from mortars, we've actually got two coil selections, and I'm pleasantly surprised to see these because they're a completely different form of gear for that mortar slot. It starts with the Lightning Coil, which strikes a single random target with an arc of electricity in front of the Colossus. This attack prioritizes targets that already have status effects on them. So if another teammate, like the Interceptor for example, had applied a debuff or a status effect to a group of enemies, and maybe 3 or 4 of them had that as status effect and 2 or 3 of them didn't, the Lightning Coil attack would prioritize the ones that did, stacking that damage that had already been initiated by the debuff from the Interceptor. So super useful single target attack here with that Lightning Coil. Moving on, we've got the Shock Coil, which emits waves of electricity out from the Colossus, damaging all nearby enemies. So in effect, this is going to be sort of like a clear out ability. You can pop this coil and just start to do damage to everyone around you. Maybe you follow that up with a melee ability. Maybe you follow that up with a flamethrower from your Heavy Assault Launcher, your wrist-mounted weapon. There's a lot of things you can do with these coils, and I just like that they're there because I didn't expect something like that. It's a pleasant surprise. Let's move on and talk about that wrist-mounted weapon with the Heavy Assault Launcher gear list, which starts with the Heavy Cannon. It's a rocket launcher. Let's leave it at that. We've got the Flamethrower, which unleashes a continuous stream of fire to ignite enemies, like flamethrowers often do. I'm actually pleasantly surprised with this one as well, because I thought the Flamethrower was going to be a heavy weapon. You know, I thought it was going to be something you equipped. I didn't really pay attention to the times where I've seen it and recognize that it was attached to the wrist, just like all of the other wrist-mounted weapons we've seen. So that's really cool. That obviously opens up a lot more opportunities to combine firearms with the flamethrower. We've got the Flat Cannon, which barrages nearby enemies with a short-range arc of projectiles. We've got a Railgun, devastating single-target precision kinetic round attack here. I like seeing these single-target weapons. There's not a lot of them, but the Railgun and like the Lightning Coil, you know, you could maybe build like a very focused DPS build here with the Colossus and run that alongside of someone who's more tanky, more AoE focused, who is also running a Colossus. There's a lot of opportunities here to mix and match with the Colossus to do more than just AoE damage from a distance. And I could see how people might start to build out some of their more close quarters, really heavily tanking focused builds by using things like the coils and that Railgun. And even the next ability, Acid Spitter, which expels an acid projectile to damage enemies. Now, it doesn't clarify if this is AoE or not, but I imagine it's slight AoE, and I imagine it definitely has some dots, some damage over time. Last on our list is, of course, the Colossus Javelin support gear, which includes Taunt, which forces all enemies within a certain radius to divert their attacks to the Colossus. This is as an old as it gets MMORPG ability for tanks, and I love that it's here. This is very clearly like, yes, the Colossus is your tank. In fact, you can taunt and aggro a bunch of enemies for your teammates, and that's just really cool. Next up, we've got the Deflector Pulse, which is the Colossus support buff, if you will. This gives all nearby allies a damage resistance buff, and you're probably seeing a trend by now where every single Javelin has some sort of a team buff that they can apply, whether it's a rally point, the muster point for the Ranger that increases weapon damage, the rally point we just saw for the Storm, for example, that decreases cooldowns. Everybody has their own team buff, their own way in which they can support their team, and that is very much tied to the characteristics of that Javelin itself. So damage resistance for a tank-focused Javelin makes a lot of sense, and I can really start to see the potential of running 2 Colossus here. I don't know why I'm so like in tune with that idea. One Colossus that's very like single-target DPS focused, maybe even running around and supporting the team a little bit more with its shield, while the other Colossus is really just in the front line, crowd control, AoE damage, and constantly aggroing enemies. You know, you could have that other Colossus then occasionally swoop in, provide that damage resistance buff to anyone on the front line, including that tank-focused Colossus, swoop back out, you know, go back to its single-target focused damage and supporting the team. There's just some really cool opportunities here. You know, the more you look at the abilities, not just for the individual Javelins, but for the list of Javelins as a whole, the more you see the opportunity to mix and match and to do some really cool stuff. Now, it's not mentioned on this list here, but obviously one of the big things about the Colossus is its tower shield. So this deployable, massive tower shield that is going to reduce an insane amount of damage and really allow the Colossus to remain on the front line longer than it otherwise could. Now, this shield can be used while hovering, it can be used while flying to support teammates, or just yourself while leaving or entering the battlefield. And it can even reduce damage from environmental hazards like acid pits or maybe natural fire, then whatever number of crazy things we might run into out in the open world of Anthem, the shield is going to be your friend to help you and the rest of your team. And I'm just thinking right now, like crazy double, maybe even triple Colossus stack. You got 3 shields up in front holding the line, while you got like a Ranger in the background just chucking grenades over their heads. Maybe you got the Storm back there doing some damage. You know, even just 2 Colossus on that front line with their shields up while everybody else is dumping DPS over the top just puts a smile on my face. I like the potential there. Last and definitely not least, with the Colossus, we have its ultimate ability, the Siege Cannon. It's a Siege Cannon. It's a giant cannon the Colossus pulls out, swings it over like, roar, and just starts laying out damage with this thing. We've seen it against the Swarm Tyrant, at which point it looked like it was doing very little damage, but it's also a giant boss, a giant insectoid creature, and it was doing some pretty serious chip damage to it, so it's definitely a pretty powerful ultimate ability that is just all about laying down the firepower, if you will. Ladies and gentlemen, that does it for the Colossus. Let me know if you continue to be super excited for the thick one down in the comments section below. And of course, this week we'll be wrapping up the series by taking a look at the Ranger, which continues to be actually one of the most promising sort of starting characters I think I've ever seen in a game in a long time. You know, typically like the starting class is something that a lot of people kind of go away from, or the class that's built to be more the Swiss Army knife, right? The sort of jack of all trades. I think a lot of people get burnt out on that character real quick, or it's implied that that character is kind of for the new player, but the Ranger has some tech stuff going on that I think is going to make it just as appealing as the rest of the roster, and I'm excited to talk about it. So I'll see you in a couple days for that one. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, remember to be awesome to one another, because at the end of the day, it's all we got. I will see you in the next one.